This is Becoming a Blockbuster YA Author, the series that will guide you through writing and publishing a hit young adult or middle grade novel, and will train your brain to think like a best-selling author. The single most effective thing for pulling on the reader is to make sure your protagonist is always actively pursuing a goal. So for every scene you write, your first question to yourself should be, what does my protagonist want? And then, the scene should serve to bring the protagonist closer to or further from that goal, depending on how they fare against the opposing forces. For every scene you write, and it's a good idea to decide on this while you're outlining, you should decide on 3 things: goal, conflict, and climax. Let's look at these in detail. So first, the goal. At the start of a scene, establish that your protagonist wants something. The reader should be clear on what they want, why they want it, and why it's critical that they attain it. It helps to have the protagonist reflect on what would happen if they don't succeed, or introduce a time crunch or another compelling reason that they can't just walk away from this goal. So for example, say our protagonist is a high schooler named Carol. Carol's goal is to ask her crush if he'll be her date to the dance. The time crunch is that she knows a popular girl named Becky also has a crush on him, so she feels like she really has to get to him first. Next, the conflict. As the scene progresses, something blocks the protagonist from achieving their goal. So someone else might have a conflicting desire, or something physical could be preventing them, or maybe an internal moral dilemma is stalling them. For Carol, we can give her crippling anxiety as she psychs herself up to ask him out. And when she finally gets up the courage, a teacher stops her to ask her about her homework. Meanwhile, her crush is surrounded by cool people, and Becky is strutting over to him. So there are a lot of different ways you can make a character's goal go awry. So just get creative and pick the ones that will make the reader the most anxious. During any scene, you'll want it to seem like it's going to be impossible for the protagonist to achieve their goal. Finally, the climax. So your scene builds to the moment where the protagonist either achieves the goal, gets closer to achieving it, or fails. Most often, they're going to fail miserably or only partly succeed, because this becomes the driving force for the next scene. For Carol, the worst failure would be if Becky asks him before she does and he says yes. The best victory is if Carol asks him out and he says yes. Of course, if you went with this one, you'd need to make sure there's a conflict in the subsequent scene. Like now she's in total panic about how to take a guy to a dance, or Becky and her friends are pissed off and sure to make her life miserable. The partial victory approach could be to have Becky get there first and ask him to the dance, but he rejects her with a glance over to Carol. This would pull me onto the next scene, wouldn't it for you? The reader will be dying to know if the love interest has a crush on Carol and what's going to happen next. Whatever climax you decide upon for your scene, it should carry with it some uncertainty, giving the reader a taste of some conflict that's going to come next. Overall, each scene needs to change something in the protagonist's life. Think of it this way: if you were going to remove that scene from your book, would your story still make sense? Every scene needs to be vital to the plot. It's hard to remove scenes that you love when you discover they don't advance the plot. In the industry, we call this killing your darlings, because we all know how hard it is to cut out a darling scene that you worked so hard to write. But it's something you have to do. Make sure your scenes all serve as an important step closer to or further from the protagonist's overall goal. Here's a tip to put readers on the edge of their seat. Create a roller coaster effect by alternating the outcome of your scenes. Make them go from high to low to high to low. If every scene ends in a disaster befitting a dun 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 sound effect, your story's going to feel repetitive. It's also exciting to create a roller coaster within the same scene. Consider an action scene where the hero escapes the place where the villain has him trapped, only to run right into a group of henchmen. He knocks out the henchmen and runs from the building, only to find that the building is at the edge of a cliff. He finds a rope and begins to climb down, only to have a surviving henchman begin hacking at the rope. On and on. So before we finish, I want to stress how important it is to make sure the protagonist's goal is the point of your scene. The majority of the time, if a reader loses interest in a story, it's because the protagonist wasn't actively pursuing a goal. A protagonist who isn't going after something will bore the reader. So make sure it's always clear to your reader what your protagonist wants, and make sure there's always something in the way. Have a look at the checklist included in the link below, and make sure all of your scenes are serving their purpose and keeping your readers hooked. The checklist also includes what we'll be talking about in the next episode, which is the crucial stop and think moments to write after each scene. This is where engaging character growth happens, and it helps you avoid having a story that's so fast-paced that it doesn't allow the reader time to process what's happening. If you're taking our coaching program, next time you meet with us, we'll be happy to answer any questions you have about scene structure and take a look at the outline you've got in progress. For free guides, worksheets, and to apply for personal coaching, go to blockbusterya.com.